Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us once again for this Drawdown interview series. I can't really even fully express how excited I am for this interview today. I am joined today by not only an environmental justice icon in Georgia, in this country, but also a movement mother of mine, Dr. Mildred McClain. And I'm so glad that you all will get to see just a snippet of the light that she brings to this work. So thank you so much, Dr. McClain, for being here with us today. Thank you for everything, as always. You know, I love you so much. And so
Not as
we'll
much as I love you.
get, we'll get, I don't know about that. We will get right into it. And we will, I will start off with a little bit of an introduction, but you are so masterful with your words, so I will not take up too much space. Dr. McClain is an icon, has been an icon in the work for over 40 years. I oftentimes, when I speak of her, I think I was on a call the other day and said, folks I know in this state doing this work that have been around longer than anybody on this call right now, in the work, and are still fighting for community, for Black and Brown folks, definitely in Savannah, definitely on a national level, and definitely internationally. So if you are not familiar with Dr. Mildred McClain, you will be just a bit on this episode, and I encourage you to learn more, not only about Dr. McClain, but also about Harambee House Citizens for Environmental Justice. So Dr. McClain, I will hand it right over to you and ask you to tell us about the history of Harambee House, also known as the Citizen for Environmental Justice, and a little bit about the work the organization is doing in the community now.
Mhm. I'm excited to be on stage with you. You are one of the up and coming young leaders in the environmental justice and climate justice work. I'm excited because I started off as a youngster in the civil rights movement. As a matter of fact, at age 13,
Right.
we were here in Savannah marching to desegregate, first of all, the lunch counters and the schools and all of that. And so it's always a pleasure to be in the company of folk who are just like me, folk that are ready to be on the front line for justice, but with a sense of humility, a sense of love, and a sense of commitment. Not it's not a job, it's not a career, it's not something that is fashionable that we just jump into. It's a lifetime commitment. So I've been doing the social justice work, like I said, since I was age 13. I was one of the second persons in Savannah to integrate Savannah High School, which was one of our leading high schools at that time, and worked with the youth group of the NAACP, and was encouraged by a great leader of ours from Savannah, Earl T. Shinholster, who went on to be a great leader in the NAACP. He grabbed me one day and said, "You're going to a meeting." And so I've been kind of hooked ever since. The history of the Harambee House is pretty interesting in that I never thought of organizing a organization or an institution to engage specifically in environmental justice work. I've always been a part of the broader movement around social justice and working to change racism in America. But sort of serendipitously, I had been working with the American Friends Service Committee in Atlanta, Georgia, as one of their coordinators for the nuclear freeze movement. So I was moving around the country trying to encourage people to look at what would be the impact of the nuclear industry. And so that was sort of like, oh, by the way, engaged in environmental work. But when I moved back to Savannah in 1990, I was looking at what was going on in my community. I've been gone for decades. And so one morning, I think it was 1991, we woke up right after Christmas, and there had been a spill from the Savannah River site that is located in Aiken, South Carolina, of 20,000 picocuries of tritium.
Hmm.
Now we all was like, okay, what's that?
What's that?
What is that?
Right.
Because we didn't know anything about a picocuri, we're not scientists,
Sure.
nor do we know anything about tritium. And truth be told, because I'm honest, we didn't know anything really about the Savannah River site.
Mm.
We had heard throughout our childhood this thing about a bum plant. And so we were thinking that, what do you mean, bums off the street? You know, people who are poor and stuff. What you talking about?
Sure.
And so when this spill occurred, we jumped right into trying to do some research, and trying to respond, because we knew it must have was something big, because it was all on the newspaper, all on the newscast of this horrible accident that occurred 125 miles upriver from us. And so that catapulted us into the main work. About 6 months prior to that, we had been in discussion with a young man out of Sparta, Georgia, and he was talking about the landfills and the municipal dumps that was impacting the health of the people in Sparta.
Mm-hmm.
He said, well, you know, what are y'all gonna do? So he kind of challenged me, like, what you gonna do, girl? Like, I'm teaching. I'm a high school teacher. I'm teaching in the public schools. I think I'm doing quite a bit. But he challenged me and said that was not enough. So one morning, I woke up after this spill, and I said, you know what? We need to put together an organization, or at least a group of people
Yeah.
that can begin to look at what is the impact on communities of color of the nuclear weapons production sites and system in this country. Because at that time, all of the communities were responding to the landfills and the petrochemical companies and the paper mills and all of that stuff. And no one was looking at this horrific source of poisoning in our community. No one wanted to take that on. And around about that time, the first People of Color Environmental Justice Summit was being planned for.
Yes.
And as a result of our kind of initiating work, we were asked to come and sit at the table to serve actually on the planning committee. But they had been working for like over a year, so we were just kind of getting in there. That struggle around what is called federal facilities under the jurisdiction of the Department of Energy was primarily being launched by the indigenous communities. And
Oh,
they were having a very difficult time engaging government and community about what was going on in the backyards of people who lived near the Savannah River site, which is in South Carolina, the people who were living in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, which was right near the Oak Ridge facility, people living in New Mexico around Los Alamos, people living in Washington around Hanford, Rocky Flats in Colorado. And so we were like the new kid on the block, and we were sort of like the only or one of few Black organizations that began to look at this very complex,
right.
very difficult issue of exposure to radiation in its different forms.
Mm-hmm.
Round about that time, there were decisions being made by the Department of Energy relative to the receipt back to America of 15,000 spent nuclear fuel rods. Not only that, they were coming from Europe, and not only that, but the disposition of 50 metric tons of weapons grade surplus plutonium.
My Lord.
Now we were like, dang, we fighting international paper and fighting issues around the port. And here we come with this sort of massive, complex facility that had been operating in our community for quite some time. And for Savannah, we're like downriver. We're the downwind folk.
Right.
And so that was the real beginning of the Harambee House jumping into the environmental justice movement head on, hands on, feet on, with very little resources. We didn't, as a matter of fact, we got started with a grant of 2,500 that was given to us by Scott Douglas. And so we were just really excited that we had the opportunity to join the environmental justice movement to represent people's voices who had been disenfranchised and had never really spoken about the military complex in this country. Because not only were we dealing with the Department of Energy, but the Department of Defense as well.
Right.
Those are the big boys. I mean, EPA is strong and powerful and all of that. But when you start dealing with the Department of Energy and the Department of Defense, that's a whole nother arena.
Right.
And so our goal was to educate our communities, to identify exactly what the issues were and what were we facing, and to engage all of the communities along the Georgia and the South Carolina side, because that facility, although is in Aiken, is its workers. 50% sort of come from Georgia and 50% come from South Carolina.
Oh,
so
okay.
it's a bi-state facility.
Right.
And our goal was to engage particularly the rural areas along that corridor, because they were the ones who were being mostly impacted.
Right.
And yet they did not have a seat at the table. So we had to figure out how to use the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA. Actually, I became the NEPA ninja. How do we use this tool to ensure that regular moms and pops, Aunt Sally, Uncle Bubba, Pookie, and them was at the table, because they were in fact the ones bearing this, as I said earlier, horrific impact of all of the activities that were going on at the Savannah River site, and as it was intersecting with 12 other facilities around the country. So even the vernacular was very new to us. Like I said, we didn't know what a picacurry was. So we had a very steep learning curve, not only for the community, but for ourselves, we were taking on this mantle of sort of leading this fight. And so that's sort of the genesis of the Harambee House, although I would have to acknowledge that it really started way back when I lived in Tallahassee. We did a lot of work around community engagement, around health issues. And we created what was called the C.W. Quinn Community Clinic. And that we use as a tool to gather the people. And we were talking about how can we create a facility, an institute that would be ours, where we could use this to launch any type of campaign around the community or around environmental justice or climate justice. And so we said, if we ever got a building and we ever formed an organization, we would name it Harambee. And the reason why we would name it Harambee is because from the language of Kiswahili spoken in East Africa, Tanzania, Kenya, and Uganda, the word Harambee means let's pull together.
Right.
And we thought that that would be the strategy
Right.
the value, the tactic, the attitude, or all of it would be in the spirit of Harambee, pulling as many different people together, as many different sectors, as many different allies, partners, you name it, together to really fight for the survival of Big Mama. And Big Mama is none other than the earth.
Mm-hmm.
Because when we talk about what comes out of a paper mill or a petrochemical company, that is child's play compared to the impact of this whole nuclear piece.
Mm-hmm.
And so we knew that in order to push the needle or even gain some attention, we would have to have as many voices at the table as possible. And at that time, we was using the terminology stakeholders. So we
Mm-hmm.
had to have a
Mm-hmm.
diverse set of stakeholders. You know how the government is. They're going to throw them little terminology where you got to have your paper just to understand. Oh, they're talking about this. They're talking about you have to have your glossary. And
Right.
so we had to pull together as many stakeholders as possible. And believe it or not, people were eager because they had been seeing the
Of
health
course.
effects,
Right.
had
Right.
been calling for some way to get in the game, but it just never presented itself. So when we went to community leaders like Mayor Emma Gresham in Keysville, Georgia, you know, she was ready, and we had participated in monitoring the first election that was held in Keysville in 56 years when she came on as mayor. We went to ensure that the Klan, the Ku Klux Klan, did not stop that process of voting. And she was overwhelmingly chosen as the mayor. So she became a drum majorette in that area to get people to come to the table. It's a little small place called Keysville, but it was right next to Waynesboro,
Mm.
street from Augusta, and right across the street from New Ellington, and right across the street from North Augusta, right across
Mm.
the street from Aiken. So those communities were hungry to come to the table to try to do something about what was going on because so many people were dying from cancer,
Right.
all forms of cancer. And when you touch a community's health, that's like the pulse of the community.
Mm-hmm.
So we came in saying, let us educate ourselves and try to bring science into the picture that would support the claims of the people that they were experiencing unusual amounts of various cancers, and particularly the workers from the Savannah River site. They were going home to their families and taking home some pretty dangerous stuff. And so, again, that was sort of the beginning of the Harambee House. I know I went all the way around the world, but I think the pieces that I mentioned
Yes.
very important in terms of the historical beginnings of the Harambee House, because unfortunately, that piece around the federal facilities and the nuclear weapons complex is still marginalized. It's still a very dangerous sector of work to be engaged in,
Right.
and it's very complex. And so people don't really want to take that on. There are some communities that still are fighting because they're right in the mouth of it and they can't do anything else. But very few resources
Right.
are put in the hands of those, particularly indigenous communities, to fight against what is happening to those communities as a result of where they're situated and their importance to the nuclear weapons production facilities in this country.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that background, and that makes so much sense on so many levels. As far as where Harambee House started and like what the work that I'm aware of, and I'm sure others are aware of how you all are handling that now, both of the nuclear weapon, development, but also with other pieces. To that end, you talked about the environmental and climate impact, or you talked about the environmental impacts of that facility. Are there any other kind of climate impacts that you want to mention facing your community down in South Georgia? And more particularly, what are the solutions and the resiliency efforts that you're finding are the most meaningful and valuable to the communities you serve? And how is Harambee House kind of contributing to those solutions and resiliency efforts in the face of those environmental and climate impacts?
Oh, girl, you asked a big, complex, long question, so I'm gonna try to come at it as best as I can. We're here on the coast,
Yes.
straight up and down, no chaser. And since I was a little girl in Savannah, I moved here when I was 3 years old. And I'm 76 now, and so that's 70 plus years living here. And we have always had a problem with flooding. And
Right.
now with the climate change in full force, we experience a greater degree of horrific weather events. Our hurricanes, our tropical storms, our rains, our heat it has increased to a level where we say we're in danger. Just the other day, we had tropical storm Hurricane Debbie to come through Savannah. And like many other hurricanes that have come through the last decade or two, it was terrible, particularly in terms of the flooding issue. When you talk about something practical and right on the ground, the flooding becomes a key issue. Now, our white neighbors in Tybee, they talk about sea level rise, and we need to be concerned with that as well. So we go from the macro issue all the way down to the micro. So the big one to the little one. And when you see that we still do not have in place a strong, robust emergency response, emergency preparedness and response apparatus to assist particularly our elderly, our disabled, our sick people, our young people, to evacuate in a safe and coherent, cogent manner, that is something that we have to look at and change. We are experiencing hotter summers, hotter springs. Summer starting in February. So we start sweating in
Started in February
February.
up here, so I know it started in February down there.
No, it is. And so we're still living in these substandard housing
Right.
that was made with, substandard materials. And so our elders are in sweat boxes without air.
Mm-hmm.
And as a side note, their utility bills are up, it's skyrocketing where they're unable to keep up, and they have to make choices between, am I going to get my medicine this month, or I'm going to pay the electric bill? And so all of that stuff is intertwined. We suffer from legacy pollution, air pollution. So outside of the climate, we got that environmental justice aspect of the industries that are located in Savannah, as well as most of our communities on the west side live right in the mouth of the port. So anything that happens weather-wise is much more critical for those residents who are living in the old housing stock, the substandard housing stock, and right in the middle or in the donut hole of many industries that are still not working in the way in which they should, with community building partnerships that will address those issues. So even though you talk about climate impacts and environmental justice issues, one of the central ones is our inability to create authentic partnerships with the government, business and industry, and community-based organizations to do the right thing. Not one sector can address all of these issues alone. When you're talking about air pollution and asking residents to be able to understand what that is, how to monitor. So one of the strategies that we have here in Savannah is we have created air monitoring program where we are training residents on how to actually assess what is going on in their air and to create strategies to mitigate, how to interpret the data that comes from those monitors in such a way that they'll be able to use it to go to government, business, and industry to say, okay, here's what is, here's what we need to do about it, and here are the resources that we need, and here are the partnerships that have to be in place in order to be successful. That is very, very, very key. In addition to the climate impacts and environmental justice, we are looking at building resiliency hubs. The Harambee House itself, its facilities serve as a resiliency hub. And, you know, that's the new kind of a bold, sexy thing that everybody is engaged in. Mm-hmm. And so we too are trying to create a network of resiliency hubs in Savannah that includes 8 communities on the west side, where the most egregious environmental justice and climate impacts occur. And we are trying to garner the resources to actually create and use the community centers that are already in place, transforming them into resiliency hubs with all of the solar, you know, bells and whistles and the ability to store and the battery and the EV and the chargers and all of that kind of a good stuff. Because these communities have agreed that they want to be a part of advancing solutions, right, rather than always talking about what the problems are. Because we know we suffer from cumulative health impacts. We know legacy pollution. We know redlining. We can go on and on and on and on and on, but what are we doing about it?
Yes.
And so we're trying to work with our city government. It's a challenge to work with the county, but we're trying to do that. We've been working with the industries in that area through something called the Community Business Roundtable. That's an initiative that we put together a few decades ago where we have all of the partners at the table talking to one another for generating solutions and ways to address the issues that have been identified by the community, not the Harambee House.
Right.
Important.
Very important.
We are a stakeholder.
Yes.
And we are in the community.
Yes.
We don't live over on the west side of Savannah where these prominent issues exist. So we have to follow the lead of the citizens themselves, the residents. We changed citizens because we wanted to be more inclusive. And so we use the terminology resident driven. When it's resident driven, you don't have to make somebody come to a session or a meeting. They're already there. They want to know how can they reduce the utility burden that they carry on the regular.
Yes.
How do they call for a health assessment to have the data show and back up the anecdotal stories? So I'm going all over the place, but I'm trying to give you a sense of how we approach the work.
Yes.
Some of the projects that are involved. Of course, for us, we cannot talk justice without talking jobs. And so a critical part of our work centers on workforce development.
Yeah.
Our primary training at this time occurs in terms of training disadvantaged workers, returning citizens, young people in the field of environmental remediation. So how do you take lead out of the buildings? How do you do asbestos remediation, dealing with hazardous materials? And we have introduced solar training. So how do you build these panels? How do you construct panels? How do you install them? So that we too can participate in the greening of America. The renewable energy, we worked with Savannah in passing unanimous 100% renewable clean energy initiative here in Savannah, which it took everybody being at the table to do that. But now It is a set of principles and work that's guiding the Savannah in how do we reduce the carbon footprint of our city in
Right.
collaboration, in partnership with our community stakeholders.
Yeah.
Our resiliency hubs are slated to be able to be functioning 24 hours a day because there's always an emergency. How do we create certified emergency response teams in every church, every neighborhood association, so the deacons and the deaconesses and the mothers of the church and
Right.
the teenagers, they're all working together, that when a storm comes, they're able to garner themselves and they're trained on how to respond to a medical a tree falling. I got a bandage of somebody's leg. I got to get them some hot soup. So our resiliency hubs also include the aspect of workforce development. We also house emergency supplies. We were able through our resiliency hub to respond to COVID-19, that egregious assault on the health of our people, by providing masks, providing food, providing gift cards to deal with their utility bills, medicines, all gloves, you name it, hand sanitizers, towels, toilet paper. You have to do that because when you're building a base in the community, they respond to you based on how you have responded to them and how you've taken care of them on
Yeah.
the regular, not
Exactly.
just in an emergency, because
Exactly.
we're always in the state of emergency. And so
Right.
that's a part of the resiliency hubs that we're promoting. We're promoting entrepreneurship. How do you get in on this renewable energy enterprises? How do you set up a charging station right at your neighborhood association center so that some monies and some resources come back to you? Because we're dealing with a multifaceted movement.
Yes.
We're
Exactly.
dealing with a lot of pieces that are moving, but they all align and they all intersect.
Intersect.
And
Yes.
so to that extent, we're engaged in an initiative right now. We have over the past year created a Southeast Regional Environmental Justice 10-year strategic action plan that has attempted to capture all of the primary issues of the 8 states that make up Region 4, EPA Regions 4. And we have tried to provide strategies to address those priorities, identified resources that are needed, partnerships that need to be aligned. And it's really taking on wildfire because this is the first time in our history that we have done this. Because the old saying say, if you fail to plan, plan to fail. So we wanted to put together a plan that would address the identified environment and climate priorities of these 8 states, including the coast as well as the rural,
Yeah.
because all of the communities are being impacted. And so this plan tries to bring as many different sectors together to address these priorities and to build upon this moment that we're in, this moment when an unprecedented amount of federal dollars are available. Now, it's hard to get that money. That's not COVID, but at least it's on the table. That's the first time we've had it on the table.
Right.
So communities are in the process of trying to build these alliances and partnerships and plans and strategies to get this money to move the needle over the next 10 years so that in 2035, we're able to say, indeed, we have reduced our carbon footprint. We have elevated the quality of living in impacted communities. And we have, oh, by the way, protected democracy. Because in all that we do, we are always emphasizing that the movement is about also building power so that
Exactly.
you can influence the decision makers and
Mhm.
the decision making process. Richard Moore, one of our environmental justice pioneers, always remind us, if you're not at the table, you're going to be on the menu.
Yeah.
And we definitely do not want to be on the menu. We want to be guiding those discussions, guiding the allocation of those resources, and building in a way that we have not built in the past, acknowledging all of the lessons learned from the last 30 years, 30 or 40 years. And so I think I hope I answered your question in some kind of way.
Yes, you did. You absolutely did. And I'm so glad there's so many things that you mentioned in that answer. And I'm so glad you talked about, because I was going to mention it if you didn't, but I'm so glad you did, about Harambee House's um, emergency preparedness work. Because I've been a part of kind of a mini training that you all did around emergency preparedness. And it was just in that little bit of time, because I think when we did it, it was a couple of years ago, you said, this is just a microcosm of our larger training that takes a couple of days. And even in that 45 minutes to an hour or 2 hours, I learned so much, not only about the flooding and the things that are happening in Savannah and on the coast, but also about how to prepare for emergencies myself, as someone who lives in the Atlanta area, living more inland, but still having some of these, we're joking now online about, like, I would love to live in some precedented times, because everything is unprecedented. And it would be nice to be in some precedented times. At least take me back to precedented times. But I'm so glad you mentioned it, because that is so vital for Savannah. That is so vital for us to know in general, in communities across the country and communities across the world, but also to learn in Black communities. Because something else I learned from you, directly from you, over the course of the 10 years we've known each other, is that, yes, we have to be at the table. Yes, we have to be in community with the city and the county as much as we can, but also no one is coming to save us. And so we have to save ourselves. It is not an option. Community has to be able to be educated, but has to lead these conversations around what are we doing and what can we learn and how do we change things. And so the Harambee House has always been a shining light to me of what real community-led solutions and resiliency looks like, and how the folks that work at the Harambee House, the folks that work with the Harambee House, live in or are directly from Savannah and are invested directly in their community's health. And that is what real community-led work looks like. And I've always, as you know, admired that work and seen it firsthand. So I'm so glad you mentioned the emergency preparedness stuff, but all the other things that you all are doing. And I also know, and I don't know if you wanted to mention a little bit about the international connections that Harambee House has as well. I know that you spend a lot of time in Senegal. I'm looking to get to the continent over the course of the next year or two. So I don't know if you wanted to highlight any of that before we got on to the next question, because I think that's interesting, an interesting part of the work that Harambee House is doing in the international connections between Georgia and the continent of Africa and other places.
Yeah, two quick responses in terms of the emergency preparedness and response. That's critical. And we start off at the very basic. Do you got your bug out bag?
Right. Yes.
Do you got your bug out bag?
Right.
Are you ready to roll when you got to go?
Yeah.
Do you have your medicines? Do you have your documents? Do you have your emergency contacts? There's about 40 or 50 items, small, like a can opener, your flashlight, batteries, those things need to be in place prior to an emergency. And that includes the weather, but a wildfire is not weather.
Right.
Active shooting is not weather.
Right.
But you want to be prepared if you have to move out of your residence. You want to be able to move and be able to survive in a period of time because you have prepared yourself and you know what to do in terms of response. Right. So that bug out bag, that emergency bag that you need to have in place, that's where we start. Then we start talking about definitions. But one of the key parts of emergency preparedness and response is the development of these CERT teams. CERT stands for Certified Emergency Response Team. That means you've gone through at least a 24-hour emergency preparedness and response training, which includes how do you respond to the medical events that will be associated with that incident.
Mm-hmm.
And then you are certified. So we are trying to encourage every church. Look, your deacon board need to be a cert. Your senior choir need to be a cert. Your junior choir needs to be a cert. The neighborhood association, they need to be certified because everybody is not going to be evacuated. We know this historically and culturally. Elders are tied to the land, to where they live. And just because a hurricane is coming, they ain't gonna jump up and tell them, I'm leaving. You know, they set in their ways. So then how do you assist them in being safe in place? You know,
Right.
you shelter in place, but you have to have teams that are ready and prepared to work with those people who will always shelter in place. So that's the part of about the CERT. Oh, the international work is serious. And I've been engaged in international work since 1974, a little bit prior to that, but I was able to participate in the Sixth Pan-African Congress, which was held in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, the first one ever on the continent of Africa. The Pan-African Congress was a forum that allowed African countries and their allies to meet to plan the growth and development of Africa, to look at the repatriation of Africans from the diaspora, a taking back of its resources, and how to be a world player on the world stage. And that was my beginning. It's where I met President Julius Nyerere, and he was promoting at the time the concept of the Ujamaa villages. Ujamaa means cooperative economics, and what he was trying to create was self-sufficient villages in the rural area where the populace did not have to flock to the big cities to get jobs and educated. They could get that right in their own home space. At the time, they were calling it, oh, he's trying to be socialist and he's returning to African communalism, call it what you will. It was working for the people. And because people were trying to destroy it, we knew that it was something that was going to be good. And they fought him on that. But that was my first introduction to Africa. And I was so amazed about going home as someone who had been stolen. I told the young people at the university that I would be back within a year. And my visit was so powerful, I was back in 6 months. And I was a married woman teaching with 2 children. And I packed my 2 girls up and we went to live in Tanzania for a little over a year. And that was the starting of my Pan-African self, my jumping on the Black Star liner with the Honorable Marcus Josiah Garvey, who said that we had to go back to Africa to take all the things that we had learned and all the skills that we had gained to rebuild Africa better, better, and better. And so I took that to heart. In 1974, the Harambee House launched it, not 74, 94, launched its first youth delegation to Senegal, because our thinking has always been we have to invest in the growth and development of our youth leaders, because I started at 13, so it's my job to nourish at least somebody who's 12 to come through the ranks and become an elder in the movement. We took 12 young people to Senegal. They stayed for 3 weeks. They interfaced with the Boy Scouts and the youth groups over there. They did beach cleaning and community engagement. They learned how to speak Wolof. They learned how to do art. They built relationships. And that was really the beginning of our sustained effort at the international. The El Hajj Malik Shabazz, the Honorable Malcolm X, said that we would not be just if we did not enter into the international arena, and
Right.
that we had to always have our presence at the UN. And that's why we always here at the Harambee House try to send a delegation to the Conference of Parties that are looking at, is responsible for the climate change work at the international level. There is a great controversy on whether or not that's a waste of resources, but many decisions are being made there, and you need to be there. If you're not there, you can have no influence. And I know it's expensive to go to these places. I've been to 7 so far. I've been to Bali, I've been to Durham, I've been to Paris, I've been to Copenhagen, Bali, I've been to Dubai, to Egypt. I don't think I'm going this year because I'd like to see us organize a people's cup and to host it in Africa, where the people get together and look at the official agenda of the official conference of the parties and respond from the community level, and then have the folks who go in with the blue badges to insinuate that in the conversation. It was Cecil from WEAC. Brother Cecil said, if you're not there trying to get even one word changed in the documents, you're not doing your work. So our presence is required. And no, you might not see the full-fledged impact because you don't have the blue badge, but even if you have the green badge and you go into the NGO pavilion, you see the innovative solutions that communities are coming up with that will help reduce the carbon footprint and save Big Mama. So we have to go. Our international presence is required. And believe it or not, many countries look to the diaspora
Yep.
for assistance,
Hmm.
for resources, for partnerships, for how do we link with Africa to take advantage of the raw materials that they're shipping out of Africa to America to be manufactured, to be sent back over there and sold. You
Hmm.
can't keep that cycle going. We
Mhm.
cannot continue to see these huge container vessels go to Senegal and pollute their oceans with LNG, liquid natural gas. We can't do that. And so we have to be in Panama. We have to be in Costa Rica. We have to be in Guyana. We have to be in Barbados. We have to be in Belize because we're talking about a worldwide revolution to save the planet, but also to enfranchise those who have been disenfranchised. That era is over. And so if we're not going to these, and I'm afraid of airplanes, I'm afraid of heights, but I have to go
Yeah.
because I have to have those discussions and those dialogues and be in the making of partnerships. We have just been approved by the Senegalese government. The Harambee House has just been approved with its partners to be an official partner in Senegal. Oh my God, I'm just so excited. It just happened in the last few weeks. But
Right.
we're taking delegation after delegation after delegation. And many people like Dr. Kasima Boston, our sister Queen Mother Maisha Mitchell out of Florida, Reverend Michael Malcolm out of Alabama. We cannot forget Sister Felicia with the HBCU Green Fund. We can't think, oh my God, Jackie Patterson, yourself, all of these people have always called for an international agenda where we intersect and build those strong partnerships because it's a worldwide movement. It's just
Right.
not in Savannah. It's
Right.
not just in the US. So those international partnerships and links and initiatives, right now we're helping our outfit working with HBCU Green Fund to plant 27,500 trees in Senegal along the Senegal River where it meets Mauritania. We're helping to clean up the beach. All of these intersections, teaching young people coding. We're helping to build an orphanage in Senegal that will house 100 young people who sleep on the street. That's
Hmm.
real movement.
Yes.
That's real movement. That's real talk, as Mustafa Ali would say. Real talk.
Right.
Because when you can move the quality of the life of a child or a widow who's lost her husband in a war that they knew nothing about,
Mhm.
then you are achieving the essence of environmental justice. Because it ain't, all this environmental justice, climate justice, social justice, racial justice. It's just justice.
Justice.
It's
Absolutely.
just justice. Whatever adjective or label you put in front of it, it's just justice.
Justice.
How do we live in such a way that nobody is bearing the brunt of nobody else's decision? The planet can feed everybody, all the little people and the billionaires as well. But hey, we want to eat a nice healthy salad too and not pay $40 for it. So the Lord said the earth, and the fullness
Yeah.
thereof. The ancestors assured us that, hey, this earth has been here millions and millions and millions of years. And so we're just a tiny speck in a long timeline. But when they look back on our history, what will they be able to say, Sister Eriqah? What will you have? What will be under your name? What will be under the name of Drawdown Georgia? What will be your historical record? Anybody who's listening or seeing this, check yourself.
Yeah.
See what you are contributing. Did you throw that piece of paper down on that sidewalk and didn't pick it up?
Hmm.
This is as simple as that.
Absolutely.
Because we like to live in the macro world, but sometimes those little itty bitty things helps to reduce the burden that we face. And it's us.
Mm-hmm.
It's this intergenerational movement that is going to set and is setting the tone for how we deal with every environmental justice problem we have identified. How many, no matter how many climate impacts that we scientifically explain and all of that, what it boils down to is how we will work together as people to set in place policies and programs and resources to do the job,
Mm-hmm.
but in such a way that it's not big business industries and big academic institutions, and I'm going to tell it, big EJ organizations getting all the money and then trying to tell us what to do and then trying to disenfranchise us from the table. Those are critical issues that we have to face. It ain't all hunky-dory and everything in the EJ movement and the climate justice movement. Sometimes we be fighting some toxic mess
You're right.
that impedes us from the overall goal that we've set for ourselves way back in 1990, 1991, at the first People of Color Environmental Justice Summit. We put together 17 principles that was supposed to guide our behavior, guide our thinking. And a lot of people just use them as trophies, pull them out when you want to dust them off, say them, but you don't live by them every day. We have 6 organizing principles called the HIMES principles of organizing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You can't even do the 6. You can't do, so how are you going to do the 17? But those are principles and documents that we put in place to help guide our movement in such a way that not only would we have material outcomes, but we would have spiritual outcomes. Because we don't live just in the physical body, we have a spirit as well. And we need to pull that more to the table because that's a more honest being. Our scientific knowledge and our competency, our subject matter experts, you know. They need more prayer and more singing. They used to don't want me to come to the meeting because they said I sang and prayed too much. I said, well, I'll keep that on my resume because it has moved people to come to the table when they were so scared. They never thought that they could have even a meeting with the Savannah Riverside and the Department of Energy where their voice mattered. Those people that we were, they never thought that. And they were scared. Oh, baby, they were scared. But we would gird ourselves up in prayer. We would sing and, get fired up, put on our armor and stuff and go on up in there and talk plenty smack. Ain't know what the hell we was talking about. Excuse my language. We know what we were talking about. But we were there in numbers.
Right.
Numbers matter.
Yeah.
Numbers matter. Your action matters. Your vote matters.
Yes.
You being registered ain't nothing. It's when you get up and go to the poll and use that registered vote that you have and cast it. That's when you're in the game. And so we have to use every weapon we have at our disposal to continue to move the environmental justice movement. And one of the things that we have to do is do an assessment. Where have we come in 30 years?
Right.
Where have we come and where do we need to go and how do we need to go after it? How do we hold industry and business and HBCUs and major institutions and big greens and little greens and, big EJ group? How do we hold them accountable to Aunt Sally, Aunt Sarah, Uncle Henry, Uncle Bubba, Pookie, and them? Because those are the ones who matter. Not the ones who graduated from college and the universities and we're Dr. So-and-so. And we have all these degrees behind our names and stuff like that. If it's not at the service of the community, if it's not at the service of the least of us, then we need to go home and just join the enemy. But that's kind of like the energy of the Harambee House is it's rooted in family.
Yeah.
Family tackling critical, deep, complex, difficult issues where our knowledge level is not where it needs to be. But thank God we are raising up a new generation of leaders who are competent, who are skilled. The only thing we have to deal with them is to make sure they don't get hardy-tardy and they become the other, the new oppressors. It's very difficult now. They've, made it's hard for you to get a dedicated person without paying them $90,000 a year. And community-based organizations, we ain't got no $90,000 a year to pay what you deserve to get. But you still have to figure out a way to work with us. You still have to figure out a way how you will use your skills and your knowledge and place it at our disposal. Because believe it or not, the earth will compensate you. In 2019, I think I made about $12,500. And I'm a mother, grandmother, and great grandmother. $12,500 ain't do me nothing. But that's what I made. Besides, some little honorariums here and there. But that W-9 or W-2 or whatever you get, 1099 said 12,500. But that was because the investment that I was making is an investment in my people, and like I say, always in Big Mama, because at some my belief is, my spiritual belief is, at some point I'm going to be held accountable, and I want, when that account is being reviewed, that they say I gave it all I had,
yes,
gave it what was needed. And I want to hear the words, as my mama used to say, well done, thy good and faithful servant, well done. So that's the rooting of the Harambee House. And that's what we try to share with all of the people we work with around the country, and those partners that we're building across oceans, because that's necessary. We cannot stay isolated anymore. And the same problems around environmental justice and climate change that we're facing, they are as well. So
Absolutely.
some of the solutions that we're coming up with. But now listen, Africa is on fire
It
with
sure is.
this climate change stuff, baby. They got some stuff going on. I was looking at a program in Uganda where they're actually teaching the young people how to build the monitors, the air monitors. They're building them
Mm.
and installing them and reading them and analyzing and interpreting and sending it back to the people. Oh my God. So, hey, even though there are many underdeveloped areas on the continent, it has not prevented them from coming up with innovative solutions to climate change issues, including sea level rise and all of that desertification and all of that, emergency prepared and response. They're getting in all of that. And so, with what we are learning and what we're finding, if we combine those knowledges, we have a better chance at really having a serious impact and changing things how they are.
Absolutely. Yes. Whew. That is, thank you for that. 'Cause some of that was so much, is so much to sit with, but so necessary. And I'm really glad that you mentioned kind of the connections that we all have across the world, from Georgia, but also across the world. My last question to you, I'm just kind of combining, but my last question to you is, you talked a little bit about the intergenerational things that Harambee House is doing and has done, and the ways in which you were brought up in your younger years to do the work, and how you are doing the same for many of us, me especially. I'll speak for myself. Um, what is giving you hope? What are what's the most important lesson that you can teach? Not only me, I'm a millennial, but also Gen Z, Gen Alpha. As you know, my daughter is Gen Alpha. Like, what are the most important lessons that you have learned? What's one of the most important lessons that you have learned that you can impart on us as we take the mantle and share the baton, as you say, to take this forward? And what is giving you hope? That's the last question I have. What is giving you hope in the environmental justice movement, um, as we move forward, and as you move forward in your work, and as we move forward to, again, share the baton, and take it all forward? What are some of those parting words you can give us?
Ooh, child lessons learned. That's I done learned a whole lot. And so to be able to boil it down into one that I would pass on would be kind of old fashioned one. Um, I would say that whatever your spirituality is, that you stay rooted and anchored in that. Because there will be days when you want to snatch your own head off, you'll tear your fingernails off, beat somebody up, kick down the door, kill the dog, or tree, whatever, because you're so angry at the way in which industry and big business still wins out and have the capability of continuing to pollute and exploit people. When you have been to 2,500 trillion convenings, conferences, trying to advance policies and positions, when you have gone to thousands of communities and listened to the stories of how their health has been impacted and how their elders and their children have died, when you go to what seemingly should be your partners and they come up with some crap and talk some smack and you just want to go buck wild, when you have gone just so many days without eating and sleep and your body is racked with pain, how will you stay on the front line fighting? And for me, it has been my spiritual anchoring, the teaching of my mama, my grandmother, her 9 sisters, her 6 brothers, 14 of them, my public school teachers in Savannah, Georgia. I owe them so much. My Sunday school of Second Arnold Missionary Baptist Church, I owe them so much because they instilled in me Miss Green told me, my first grade teacher, she said, Mildred, you are ugly. You have nappy hair. You got a big nose and thick lips. And you are black.
Mm.
The only way you're going to make it is through education
Hmm.
and holding on to God's hand.
My Lord.
I took that. I was 6 years old, baby. I said, that woman called me ugly. God told me I had big lips and a big nose and some nappy hair and stuff. But she ended it with, despite all of that, you have something that will help you be victorious in whatever you want to do. So I took that thing and I became a life learner. I'm always reading, I'm always talking to people, I'm always thinking, and I have never allowed my hand to slip out of the Creator's hand.
Hmm.
I have never forgotten that I stand on powerful shoulders within my family. Those 14 brothers and sisters was born on a plantation. They were slaves. Their grandmother, their mother was enslaved, and they themselves were workers on a plantation. And if they could become the beautiful people, the stalwart people that they were, we only had one out of the 14 who finished high school,
Hmm.
one who finished college. My mother finished third grade, and her greatest goal was to have her own home. When she died, she had her own home, third grade education. So those kind of people being in my life taught me, be who you are, who you were born to be, learn as much as you can, and always stay rooted and anchored in some type of positive spirituality, because you know spirituality can be defined all kind of ways these days. But they were just old Christians, and they said, keep your hand in the man's hand.
Mm-hmm.
Take you to be the man, woman hand. It's okay, here you go with that stuff, that modern stuff. I said, no, Ma, I'm just kidding.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the lesson that I would pass on, that self-determination is key. Kuji Chaga Leah, don't let nobody define you. You define yourself. You define yourself and you help your community define itself. Nobody can define yourself but you. And then what is it that gives me hope? You.
Don't make me cry.
You and you and how you and your husband relate as a team. That is so, that's so impressive. How you all deal with your daughter and people like you, young people like you who think it not robbery to come and work with us, even though you could go and work in City Hall and the White House and the whatever. You choose to work with community. So my hope is that it's rooted in this intergeneration, and it's always been intergenerational. Don't let nobody define us. I had somebody to mentor me when I was 13. My
Right.
teachers were no 13, 14-year-olds. They were
Sure.
my teachers in school. Though it was the older young people who, my first demonstration walk in Savannah, I was being led by somebody who was 16. Uh-uh, you know? So my hope lies in the unmovable strength of oppressed people to keep on pushing on.
Yeah.
No matter how hard there's an old song, old Christian say, I feel like going on. I feel like going on. Though trials, they come on every hand. I feel like going on. So you hum that through yourself all day when you feel like I just can't do it. If that person say this to me one more time, I'm gonna slap them into never worry. But you suck in your breath and you hum whatever tune. You have something that allows you to get yourself back to yourself when you're coming out of yourself.
Right.
Because this is not what they did. There ain't no sprint. It's a marathon.
Mm-hmm.
And the marathon don't end until we win. And so my hope lies in the fact that in 2024, we have a black woman for president with a white man. We have a black woman running for president. And she has brought so much energy and joy and hope and vision and energy and joy and hope when it was all dead. It was like a dead, we was like, well, we going out to get the people to vote. Now we running. Yeah. We out there day and night because a symbol of true hope and joy has been placed right in our midst. I never thought I would see that day. So I'm thankful to the Creator that He let me live long enough to be able to say, yeah, and I tried to get her elected. Now, I'm speaking as Dr. Mildred McClain because I want to let everybody know that the Harambee House is 501c3 and we don't be, so it's up.
Understood and heard.
We ain't violating no laws or anything like that. Right. We don't have no placards for anybody on the campus of our organization, but as individuals, we are trying to mobilize as many people to go to the polls as possible to vote their own choice.
Yes, of course. I am so honored to have had this conversation with you. I am so honored for the people who will watch this to have witnessed what I always witness. And I love you so much, and there's nothing you can do about it.
You better not stop loving me.
I never will. I never.
Brave and beyond, sister. I love you so much.
I love you.
I'm so proud of the work that you do, but more importantly, I'm proud of the way in which you do the work. See, the work is important, but the way we do the work is even more important. So I'm proud of you.
The greatest lesson that Mildred McClain ever taught me, she took my head in her hands and she said, don't ever let anybody define you for you.
I remember that conversation.
Know who you are, and I know who you are because I see you. And I see you, Dr. McClain. So thank you so much. Thank you all for joining us. I hope this has been as powerful for you as it has for me. And we will see you next time. Thank you. I love you, Doctor.
Love you.